In this video, I will show you how to set up social sign-on for LinkedIn using both Aura and LWR Experience Cloud site templates. The first section can be thought of as a companion resource to this Identity for Customers Trailhead module. We'll go through setting up all of the profiles, users, and site configuration settings that you need to get the authentication working. In the second section, I will show you how to use the LinkedIn API to retrieve the profile photo of the user that logs in. I will do that by helping you set up my reference implementation that's stored on GitHub, and then I will demonstrate and walk through all of the features of that reference implementation. In the third section of the video, I will show you how to add this login with LinkedIn link at the bottom of your Experience Builder login page. So if we click this, it takes us directly to the LinkedIn login page and eventually to our home page, which shows the user information, including the LinkedIn profile photo, just like this. So I hope you enjoy the video. Here we are in setup of our Scratch org, and we're already at the Digital Experiences page. And you can see here I already have an LWR site built, and our status is active, which means we've already activated it in the administration section of Experience Builder, or the Experience Workspace. So you want to make sure this is set, because you'll run into problems down the line if you don't set this first. So to do that, you go into Administration, and if your website isn't activated yet, you'll have a button here that says Activate instead of Deactivate. So you need to do that, and then you need to go back to Experience Builder and make sure that you've published, which we'll do right now. So up here, the head's in the way. Up here on the right side, you gotta hit the Publish button. And we'll say, yes, publish our site. And now that it's published, we should be able to open up a private browser window. I'm going to use a completely different browser. I'm developing in Chrome, but I'm going to use a private Firefox browser window just to make sure there's no crossover of sessions when I log in, so I can really simulate logging in as an external user. So we're going to go New Private Window. And I need the URL for the published site. So let's go back to Administration, Settings, and let's just grab this URL and put it into Firefox. So as you can see here, this is the boilerplate login page you get when you create an experience site with the LWR build your own template. Now the problem with this, this is a standard component written by Salesforce. It does not have automatic support for the identity auth providers like LinkedIn, Facebook, Google, etc. So we're actually going to go back and use the Aura, the old Aura version that does have support for those at first. And then later on in the video, I'll come back and show you how to get the LinkedIn auth provider to launch from an LWR site using this, this version of the login page. So for right now, we need to actually switch this to the Aura version so we can continue. So I'm going to close this. And let's go back to login and registration. And let's change the login page type to default page. And just for completeness, let's change the forgot password page to the default page as well. And then we will save. And once again, we'll need to publish. Okay, now let's open up our private window again. And now we can see we have the old Aura login page. So we're going to go ahead and start working on the identity authorization provider for LinkedIn right now. So let's go ahead and go back to our setup. And everything kind of revolves around an identity auth provider. So let's just say auth, and let's go to auth providers. Now, if you just do a new one here, you can see that there's a selection of default available types. everything on here, all the major auth providers on here. We're going to be using LinkedIn. So if we select that, you can see that the endpoints are already there for you. What's happening here is that Salesforce already has an application registered with LinkedIn that we can reuse. They'll forward the authorization requests to our site or our org on our behalf. So normally you would have to create your own app, register it with LinkedIn, and go through all of that registration process. Salesforce has already done that, so we're just going to reuse it because it works pretty well. So in this case, if we scroll down the form here, what you'll see is we need a registration handler, and this is the Apex class that will get called after the LinkedIn authorization completes. So once that completes, the user information from LinkedIn will get routed to an Apex class running on our Salesforce org. And this registration handler is where we assign the Apex class that will get called. So we'll create that class in a minute. The next thing is the user that the registration handler will execute as. So that Apex code that we provide in this registration handler text box above, this has to run as a user. We will create a new system user for this registration handler to run as. Now this user will be who is in charge of creating and updating the user records in Salesforce that get created when someone logs in with the LinkedIn authorization. I find it instructive to start with the registration handler code because it really is the heart of this whole process. So if we can look at an example of how that handler can be written and how that code works, we can then use that to figure out what things we need to set up in our org for the whole process to function. So where we're going to start, the Trailhead module that covers the customer identity stuff has a version of a registration handler for Facebook, but it actually works for LinkedIn just the same. So we're going to use their example as our starting point. I think it's a lot more instructive to see the completed version first before building one from scratch. So let's just do it this way. So we're going to go ahead and copy the raw file here. And we're going to go to our Visual Studio Code project, or sorry, SFDX project in Visual Studio Code that has our website already in it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Force App Classes, and I'm going to create a new Apex class. So this will be our handler. And I'm going to call this LinkedIn Registration Handler. And we're going to go ahead and just copy the contents of that GitHub file, that example from Salesforce, from Trailhead in here. And then all we need to do is just change this class name to match our file name. So this is linked in registration handler, just like that. So you can see it's just an Apex class that implements a specific interface. So this auth registration handler interface. And the only two methods, externally callable methods, or ones that we care about that get called are this create user. So this will get called the first time someone authorizes via LinkedIn. So they've never seen our system before, but they're registering with their LinkedIn credentials. This create user will get called. And the second one is update user. So this is for people who are just authenticating for the second, third, fourth, fifth, whatever time with LinkedIn. We'll come through here, update their various data points on their user record. You can see here, this is just a straight up Salesforce S object for the user that we update with the email address, last name, and first name. So really, those are the two entry points to this handler class. So let's go back to the create user because that's the one that gets called first. And let's see how this works. So we've got a portal ID comes in. In my experience, this is null, so I'm not actually sure. We don't really do anything with this. So you can ignore the portal ID for right now. The second piece of information is the user's data that comes back from LinkedIn. So this is the name of the user, the first and last name, if it's from LinkedIn, their email address, and it actually has some information about their profile image, but we'll get to that later. So you just have to worry about right now the name and the email. So we come into here and we call another function or method called canCreateUser. So this is just a failsafe to make sure there's enough data in the data from LinkedIn to create a user. So all this does is check to see if the email, first and last name are all there. And if they are, we continue on and create a user. So we check to see if this is actually an Experience Cloud login. And we have to create a contact. So if Salesforce requires that there's an account and a contact off of that account for every user that uses your Experience Cloud site in this way. So this goes and creates a contact ID and then assigns, or it queries for a profile that we set up to assign to the user. So in the end of this, we're going to have a contact that comes off of an account we create, and also a user record or user object that maps to that contact record. So here you can see it creates the contact, goes and gets a profile based on this, this constant that we've set, and then it creates the user and assigns it that profile. Then once it's all done with that, it returns the user. So if you don't return a user in this case, the authentication process fails and the user does not get into your website. So everything here has to go smoothly in order for that user to actually access your website. And then down here, you can see there's some stuff for an internal user. Says this is not a community. So we assign an internal profile. At this point, we are only concerned with Experience Cloud users, external users coming in. We're actually going to delete this. I'm going to get rid of this else statement just for clarity. And we're just going to return null if we make it all the way down here. So as you can see, we return the created user here, or return null also when we cannot create a user, when there isn't enough information from LinkedIn to create a user. So returning null is a perfectly acceptable way to get the process to fail. Okay, so if we go up here, we can see that these constants that we defined kind of give us some clues as to some of the things we need to set up in our Salesforce work. So you can see the account name. So when I said there is a contact record that's associated with each user that comes into your website, they have to be associated with an account. So we need to create a customer's account. We also need to create a customer's user profile, and we have to give that user profile permissions to access your site. And then this internal user profile, we don't actually use it. So if you do the Trailhead module, one of the things they have you do is they have you modify this internal user profile to be a system admin, which would be a terrible idea. People can register for system admin privileges to your internal Salesforce site. Seems like a bad idea. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. And then deploy this class to our org. Okay, so now we can get to creating the customer's account and the customer's external user profile. So let's go back to our Scratch org and let's set up, well, first let's go create the account. And as the handler says, it has to be named customers. So let's save that. Now we need to go and create a profile. So that's going to be back in setup. And this profile will be a clone of the external user's profile or external user identity profile. So profiles. And let's just hit E. So this external identity user, we're just going to clone that and call this customers. Now we need to create a profile for the user that our registration handler, our LinkedIn registration handler runs as. In the Trailhead module, they have you just run the registration handler as your user, which is a system admin, which is not great practice. So I just want to give you guys the step-by-step on how to do this in a real environment where you would create a separate system user for that role, assign it a profile with permissions that are less than system administrator, and get that running. So let's go ahead and create a new profile. We're going to clone, let's see, let's go back to profiles. We're going to clone the minimum access profile. So if we go to M, minimum access clone. I'm going to call this customer manager. Customer manager user. There we go, customer user manager. I think that makes sense. So let's save that. And we're going to need to add the manage users permission. So if I edit this, just search for manage users. Let's go ahead and check that box. Scroll back up and find the save button. We now have a profile for a user we have not created yet. So let's go ahead and go to the users. And we're going to create a new user. We're going to call this system user. And I'll give it my email address so that I can get any updates that happen. Now for the username, this has to be a globally unique username, not just unique to your org. So what I usually do is I just grab the unique domain name here and use that to create an email address username. If I just do that and say suser. If you guys have a better system for doing that, let me know in the comments. Okay, now we're going to leave role unspecified for right now. We will have to come back to that because Salesforce will require that this user has a role in order to create users. But for right now, we'll leave that alone. We'll come back to it. So we're going to go Salesforce. We're going to say profile is our customer user manager. And get rid of this because I don't work there anymore. Save. Okay, so now we have the profile for our user. Or no, we have the user with the profile assigned. So the next thing we need to do is create a role, and this is covered in the Trailhead module as well. So let's go ahead and create a role. I'll pick product-based. I don't think it really matters. And the Trailhead module says to put it under the CEO. I don't think it actually matters. We'll add the role here. We'll call this customer manager. Save that. And we will go ahead and assign both the system user we just created and our user that we're logging in as, because we are going to create, we already created the account with our user we're logged in as. So both those users need a role. So we're going to go ahead and use this role for both of those. I actually don't really like doing it this way. I'm going to go through the users menu. This other menu is ugly. So we're going to go ahead and this is the user we're logged in as. So we're going to change this guy to the new role we just created. Customer manager. And we're going to create or change the system user to the same role. Now we can finally go back to the auth providers area and create that LinkedIn auth provider. Let's go to auth, new LinkedIn name it LinkedIn, and we can select our registration handler Apex class. I just put in linked. There's our LinkedIn registration handler. And we want to execute the registration as our system user we created. And we can go ahead and set the icon as well. So let's do that. And we'll grab one of these LinkedIn icons. Grab that URL. And save. Okay, so now we should have the ability to modify our experience site to now use this authentication. So let's go back to, this is the administration page for our Experience Cloud site. And let's go to login and registration. And now we can see our LinkedIn auth provider shows up as an option. So we're going to want to check that. And also we want to check this allow customers and partners to self-register. We don't want to create the users manually. So we're going to go ahead and click that. And then we're going to change this to the default page as well. Let's go ahead and save all that. Okay, we also need to make sure that the profile that we're assigning to our users that come in from LinkedIn have access to our site. So that's where you have to go to the members area. And by default, you can see that system administrators are the only profile that have access to the site. So we need to add our new customers profile, which we can find by searching all. And we should be able to scroll down and say customer. So this is the profile we created earlier. And we'll go ahead and save that. I think that took. Let's go ahead and publish our site just to make sure here. Let's go back to Experience Builder, publish. Got it. Okay, so let's close our browser window just to make sure. And go to the new private window. Go grab our URL from settings. Here's our logged in with LinkedIn Auth provider down here. Today, for some reason, I'm having problems getting this icon to pop up. So I'm not sure what's going on with that. It has worked in the past. We will solve that problem when we do our custom login form. So from here, you can click login with LinkedIn, and it will redirect us to the LinkedIn login form. So I'll reject those. And this is just the same no matter, this is not Salesforce. This is actually going to LinkedIn servers, and you can use your LinkedIn username and password. So I'll sign into my LinkedIn account. And then we're redirected to our Experience Cloud site. So we successfully logged in to our Experience Cloud site using credentials from LinkedIn. Pretty cool. Now, to demonstrate kind of what happened on the back end, let's go back to our org, and let's refresh our account page here. And you can see there's a new account or a new contact that's attached to the user. And it's my name, my email address, that all came from LinkedIn. The other thing you can see is if we go to setup and go to users, there's now a user record as well. So you can see right here, I have a user record with my information from LinkedIn. And it's attached to my head's in the way once more. it's attached to our customer's profile. You can see right here. So you can kind of see how those pieces work together. In this next phase, I'll show you how to get the profile photo from LinkedIn. Now, it's a little bit of a complicated process, so I think it might be easier for me to show you a reference implementation and walk you through the various steps. So this first part, I will show you how to get the reference implementation running on your own Scratch org. So here on GitHub, I have a repository with that reference implementation. So if you scroll down on my GitHub page, and I'll put this link in the video description, you'll see the readme.md has the setup instructions. So we'll follow these instructions, and I'll show you this, this component working. So first of all, we're going to clone this repo to our local computer. So to do that, we need to grab the code and then just copy this URL, open up Visual Studio Code, and go to our source control and say clone repository, paste that URL in, and then pick a location on our local computer, put it into tutorials. Yes, select to open the repository. And here we are with all the files for the repository. Now let's go back. So the README from the repository is right here. So I can just open it there and continue to follow the instructions. So you see that's the same file as shows up right here. So we cloned the repo. Now we need to create a Scratch org. So we're going to create a Scratch org using the project Scratch def JSON from this project. So create default Scratch org. And yes, use the default file, and we'll just call it the same name as the project. And 7 days is fine. Okay, our Scratch org is created. Let's go ahead and move to step number 3, which is going through some of these files in the project and updating them with a user from your org you just created. So first, we're actually going to go to the terminal window and open up our org. And grab the default username that's created with the Scratch org. So this user down here is what we log in as. Let's just copy that whole username. And we're going to go into where this replace this tag is. So the easiest way to do this is Control-Shift-F, find in files, and then I already have the replace this in there. Replace this is right there. So then we can go to the spots where it exists and replace the entire username with the username from our org. So like that. And then the next instance of it is right here. Oops. So this is just setting the users that we run the site as, and the auth provider, the registration handler for the auth provider as. Okay. So now that that's done, make sure that saves. Now that that's done, we'll move on to step number 4, which is deploy this SFDX project to our new Scratch org. So let's say SF project deploy start. Okay, that's deployed. Next step is to open the Scratch org and create the customer's account. So this is the account that our contacts attached to our experience site users will be attached to. So let's go ahead and go back to our Scratch org. Go to accounts. New account. We just need to name it customers with no other information. Okay, so that step is done. Next step is number 6, which is to add the customer user manager to your default org scratch user. So back in setup, let's go to users. And let's edit this user and give them the customer user manager role. Save that. Back to our instructions, number 7. Now we're going to work on the settings for the experience site. So let's go to set up all sites. Sites. And we're going to go to workspaces, administration, login, and registration. Workspaces, administration, login, and registration. And we need to click this LinkedIn provider box and then save. Next step is to go to Experience Builder and publish the site. So I'll publish that. I'm just going to copy this from, well, I'll publish it and copy it from the admin settings. Okay, back to our instructions. It says you should now be able to browse to the customer site with the private or incognito browser and log in with your LinkedIn credentials. So if I go back to administration, settings, grab the URL for the website, open up Firefox in a new private window, paste that into the browser URL bar. I get the default Salesforce login with LinkedIn as an option. So let's click that. I log in with my LinkedIn credentials. And we're in the site. Now, the first time you hit the site, it doesn't actually grab the user information. This is supposed to be the username here and the email address after your email address is. So let's go ahead and close that and we'll log in one more time. And here this time we have Hello Mitch Rout, which is my full name from LinkedIn and my email address from LinkedIn. And this is the placeholder user photo from Salesforce. So this control is grabbing from the user record the medium profile URL and displaying it. But if your record does not have a photo, you get this default image. So what we're going to do is we're going to push this Get Photo from LinkedIn button, which should go out to LinkedIn, grab my LinkedIn photo, which I guess I could show you. Let's go linkedin.com. I should already be logged in. And here's my photo right here, as you can see. So if I push this button, and then refresh the page, there's my photo from LinkedIn. So this is the reference implementation that gives you everything you need to not only log in via LinkedIn, but to get the photo from LinkedIn. So let's go back to our Visual Studio projects, our SFDX project in Visual Studio Code. And let's walk through what's actually happening to get that done. So first of all, what you saw on the page were two Lightning Web components. The first Lightning Web component is the user info. So this is just a straightforward HTML with a couple of paragraphs and the image source. So like I said before, Salesforce stores the user images as a URL you can reference. So that's what this image tag does right here. And then I just have a couple of paragraphs with JavaScript variables mapped up to them. So if we go look at that JavaScript, this is simply using the get record from the UI record API in Lightning. You can also do this with an Apex controller on the back end, but this seems to be the encouraged way to do user query stuff from Lightning Web Components. So this is really straightforward. The interesting stuff happens in the other Lightning Web Component, which represents the button that goes out and gets the image from LinkedIn API. So if I go to this LinkedIn photo button, this is simply a button that calls a JavaScript function. That turns around and calls a function on an Apex controller. So let's go look at the Apex controller LinkedIn photo button controller. Let's go to classes, LinkedIn photo button controller. Let's see if I can get my head out of the way here so you can see a little bit more of the code. Okay, so this get profile photo is the entry point for this controller. This is what the JavaScript for the Lightning Web Component calls. The first thing it does is it gets the access token from LinkedIn, or actually gets it from the auth provider that was used to log in to Salesforce via LinkedIn. So Salesforce provides us some methods to get the access token. So let's go ahead and go look at the get access token method, which is down here. So the way this works, this is the important method right here. This auth.auth token get access token. This is an Apex method that lets you pass in the provider ID, which we get by selecting from the auth provider object the developer name LinkedIn, which is what we gave the auth provider that we created in the first section of this video. So if we get that ID, we pass it in, and then this second string here is actually the proper name of the third party that we're using. So this could be Facebook, this could be Google, this could be a bunch of other predetermined names for providers, identity providers. It just so happens that we use the same name for the auth provider we created as the official LinkedIn provider name. So don't be confused, these are actually two separate values. They just happen to be set to the same thing right now. So once we get the access token, this gives us the currently logged in access token for the current user. And because we are running a Lightning Web Component in our Experience Cloud site, we're running as the logged in user from LinkedIn. So the external identity user that logged into LinkedIn. So we do get the proper access token for the LinkedIn user. So if we go back to our main entry point here, we now have the access token. So why do we need the access token? Well, because we're about to make some REST calls out to the LinkedIn API. So the first step in this process is getting the image information for the user in question, so the user that this token belongs to. Now, this magic URL right here, this long one that I have inside this file, I simply got this by going to Google and typing LinkedIn profile photo API. And the first result is a Microsoft web page that basically tells you what you need to call to get this information. So I really just copied this URL right here. So this isn't magic, this is just some simple Googling. Okay. So now we have that URL. We need to call that URL with an HTTP GET request and also set our access token in the header of that request. So if you scroll down here, I have a method called make HTTP request. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like. And there's an Apex HTTP request object that you can create. You set the URL, which is the one we copied from the Microsoft site. You set the HTTP method type, which in this case, we're just doing a GET. And then we can set the header. So we set an authorization header with a bearer token, and we pass in that access token we got from our auth provider. So let's go back up to the top. Once we have that request, we have a photo info response here. This photo info response that comes back from the make HTTP request, there's actually an example of the JSON format that comes back on that same Microsoft webpage. So let's go ahead and open that again. Probably shouldn't close it in the first place. We'll say LinkedIn Photo API. Click that first link again. And beyond our URL, it says, hey, when you call this URL, this is the format of the data you get back. So in here, you can see the main element is a profile picture. You can stare at this for a while, but what really comes down to is down here, this identifiers collection. This identifier within the identifiers collection is the URL we need to call in order to retrieve the actual binary for the image that will then save to Salesforce. Now, you'll get a collection of these. Scroll down so I get the bar here. You'll get a collection of these that come back. It's not just one URL. So it'll be the same URLs for the same photo, but they'll be in different sizes. You get 100 by 100, 200 by 200, 400 by 400, etc. So we need to take that response, which contains that JSON, and extract the URL we need out of that JSON response. So that's what this get image URL from response does. So if we go to the implementation for that, you can see that I'm creating a parser for the body of that response. So the body of that response contains that JSON we just saw on the Microsoft site. So we create a parser, and there may be a better way to do this. If you guys know a better way to work with JSON and Apex, please let me know in the comments. I'm not in love with this implementation, but the way we're doing this is we're just going through each token in the JSON and checking to see if it has the name identifier that we're looking for. And then if it does, we take that value and we put it into a collection that we can then select from. So you can see while there is another token to parse, we get the field name. We see if that current token is a field name, and then we check to see if that field name is the field we're looking for. And then we move on to the next token, which would be the value that goes with that field. And we get the text out of that value, which will be our URL. And then we add it to the collection that we want to return from. And we move on. So in this case, I'm just getting the first URL that we get, which is actually the lowest quality image. You can see here the comment I made that it goes from lowest to highest. So just for demonstration purposes, I am returning the lowest quality. You can decide which of those you want to pull out and change the code accordingly to use whichever version of the photo you want. Okay, so now that we kind of have an idea of how the JSON parsing of the response works, we now have a URL that gets us directly to the image we want to basically download. We just need to request that URL once again with our access token. So if we scroll back to our main entry method up here, now that we have our URL, we're going to make yet another HTTP request. And this time we're going to pass in the image URL and the access token again. So this is the same method. It just is generic and makes an HTTP GET request to the given URL with the access token. And at that point, we get a photo response that actually has a binary in the body. So it has the actual JPEG is in the body. So we're going to save that to Salesforce, save that to the user field in Salesforce. So if I go to this save photo method, you can see we take in an HTTP response, and we have this Apex call that we can make on the HTTP response, it says get the body as a blob. And so instead of text or something else, we get it as a blob of binary data. And we can put that into a blob type object. And then we are able to get the current username. I use the username to create the file name. I don't know if that's a great scheme or not, but you can do what you like in that case. But we use the user ID of the current running user to determine where we're going to insert the profile photo. And in this case, we're going to use the Connect API binary input to create a new JPEG file with our photo blob. And then we take that file and we use the Connect API once again to set the photo on our profile. And that's it. That's how the photo gets from LinkedIn into Salesforce. And then you saw with the Lightning Web Component how you display it using the medium photo URL from the user object. The last thing I'd like to show you is how to trigger the LinkedIn authentication from an Experience Builder page, so like a Lightning Web Component. And it's actually pretty easy once you know exactly what URLs to use. So what I'll do here is I'm going to go into the Identity Auth providers. And if we go to our LinkedIn Auth provider, you'll see a set of URLs down here. And we're concerned with this single sign-on initialization URL, so that starts the single sign-on process. You can see that this link is the link that you would use if you're trying to sign on to your Salesforce org for an internal user, but we want to do it for an external user on an Experience Cloud site. So what we're going to do is just grab this second half or second part of the URL that's after the domain name, which will be different for our Experience Cloud site. And we're going to use that as a relative link to kick off the process. So let me go ahead and copy that. And we'll go into Visual Studio Code and create a new Lightning Web Controller so that we can put the link on our Experience Cloud page. So we'll say create Lightning Web Component, and we'll call this linked in Auth. And this will probably be the simplest LWC you ever create. We could actually do this as an HTML element in Experience Builder, but I like to keep everything in code. So I'm going to ignore the fact this has JavaScript, and let's just go to the HTML, create an anchor tag, which is just a link, and make the href the relative path. So that's how we would actually redirect to the authentication on LinkedIn. But as part of this URL, we need to pass LinkedIn the redirect URL to come back to after the authorization process or the authentication process is complete. We need to give it a URL parameter called start URL. So the way you do that is with a question mark and you say start URL. And then we need to set that parameter to the relative URL of our Experience Cloud site. In this case, it's customers. So we need a /customers. But because we're passing a URL as a parameter, we need to encode that URL. So we need encoding for the /. Now, an easy way to do that is to just say URL encode on Google, pick one of these, and we can just say /customers and say encode. And that'll give us this %2f customer. So %2f will just be that /. So let's just go ahead and copy that. And we'll set our start URL parameter to that. So that should be good there. And let's go ahead and give this some text, and we'll say log in with LinkedIn. And before we deploy this Lightning Web Component, we do need to set the metadata so that it shows up in Experience Builder. So I'm going to go grab an existing XML, copy that. and deploy. Now let's open Experience Builder, add it to our page, our login page. So go to Builder, select the login page here. And this is the standard Lightning component for logging in, but we're going to add our component underneath. LinkedIn Auth. Just grab that, drag it over. So we get the login with LinkedIn link down here. And let's go ahead and go back to the administration for our site. And we need to point the login to our page, because remember from the first section we pointed it to the default page. So if we go to login and registration, now we need to go back into the administration section of our site and point the login and registration to our Experience Builder page. So back to administration, login registration, and we had set it to default page for the older Aura login page. So we'll just change this to Experience Builder page, search for our login page, and I guess for completeness we'll set these back to their defaults. Even though we won't really be using those right now. Okay, and save. Now that's all set up. Let's go back to Experience Builder. Let's publish. And let's navigate to our site using our private Firefox window. Here's our logged in with LinkedIn link. And you can see on the bottom, it fills in the domain name, even though we were only using relative. So you don't have to go retrieve it specifically, which is really nice. So click on that. We get redirected to the LinkedIn login. And here we are, we're logged in and my information comes up. So we have added the LinkedIn Auth to the Lightning Web Component, so that's great.